I want to introduce today's speaker. I met Jeremiah in Santa Fe last year through a colleague and was fortunate to visit his home in the foothills where I could see some of the permaculture techniques that he's used to create a wonderful garden and orchard area around his house. Jeremiah Kidd's work is directed by Permaculture Principles, a whole system science-based approach to design. He's a certified permaculture designer and is an accredited and certified rainwater catchment professional through ARCSA, the American Rainwater Catchment Systems Association. He has taught and consulted on several projects in the USA, Africa, Central America, and Asia. Prior to establishing San Isidro Permaculture, he was a partner at Living Structures, Inc., a permaculture-based design installation green building firm in Santa Fe. Established in 2000, San Isidro Permaculture is a design and installation company focused on water catchment, greywater systems, native and edible plant landscapes, erosion control, and land restoration. It has served Santa Fe and the surrounding area, working for the private sector, federal and local governments, the film industry, and commercial projects. So as you can tell, he's got a wide range of experiences. So whether you live in the relatively wet parts of the country or in the arid Southwest, I think you'll find that Jeremiah's approaches to water harvesting are going to be very informative.
Let's see. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I hope that we have a really informative hour with you all. And let's go ahead and just get started. Again, as everyone knows, throughout the country, we've been dealing with drought in the West for quite a while now. This is New Mexico a couple years ago, and when we were in pretty extreme drought, from the whole state was abnormally dry to extreme drought. Things have gotten slightly better here in the last year or so, but it's still we're still below average. Here is the recent U.S. Drought Monitors map showing the West is in a continued long-term drought. Even with the extra water or the recent water that you've been getting in California, in the long term, things are looking pretty dry. And we're basically living in an age of uncertainty. With all the information and technology that we have, we still don't know what's going to happen with our weather. With this drought and also with long-term climate change, the experts say that some places, we know that we're going to get warmer, but some places may get drier, some places may get wetter, and basically how can we design resilient systems for whatever our uncertain future brings us, right? So, and also there's a growing trend in Western countries where people want to know where their food comes from. They want to have increased health while decreasing their miles that their food travels to get to their table. And even wanting to produce more of their own food, right? So many people in the West are actually seeing producing their own food is actually increasing their quality of life. So how can we merge our desire to produce our own food while mitigating the effects of our uncertain weather patterns to provide resiliency and abundance for our families and our communities? In this presentation, I want to offer 5 key strategies to do that. So again, we've been in this drought system, and it's not, I wanted to bring up the point about drought versus desertification, that drought we have at a community level very little control over, but we do have control over desertification in the larger scale. Depending on our land use patterns and our engineering and design patterns of our communities, right? So from overgrazing to basically designing, hard structures to drain all of our water away, there's a difference between drought and desertification, and we have some control over desertification. In the arid Southwest, in the New Mexico region, I'm based in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the recent years, we had in 2013 and 2014 were our two driest years on record, and we had several wildfires. These wildfires tend to seal the soil and not allow water recharge in the soil, which increases the water runoff. Oops, I got the slides going here. Increases the water runoff, quickly taking the topsoil away and reducing the amount of water infiltration in our soils. So this is an example of our topsoil being washed away, increased erosion. Here again, pedestaling of plants, washing the topsoil away, which decreases the amount of possible ground covers. All of these examples are showing basically the wringing out or the draining of the sponge. So the water is not able to actually soak into the soil. It's just draining as quick as it can to the river and not allowing for aquifer recharge. This is our mighty Santa Fe River. You can see that it's quite engineered and quite hard. You know, there's much hard structures around it where it can't really infiltrate very well. And again, we can't control droughts on a community level, but we don't need to increase desertification by draining our arid landscapes of the stormwater. This approach to civil engineering and management of stormwater and development and infrastructure projects basically drains our sponge in the soil. So what is dehydration infrastructure? Basically, it's increased non-porous areas, roads, and houses, deforestation of the mountains, selective overgrazing, stormwater diversion, which of course leads to increased runoff, lower aquifers, loss of rivers, increased work, and less food. Here's another example of that desertification infrastructure. Basically, this parking lot was just redesigned to allow the water to get to the plants, and that the planting area was lower than the catchment surface. They would be using much less water in this landscape, and this looks like a mulberry tree would be doing much better. These are examples of dehydration infrastructure, basically cementing or hard surface covering your whole lot, increasing runoff and decreasing infiltration into the soil. This is another example of, besides just not soaking water into the soil, then you have the added effect of the sun in arid areas. So this is 9:30 in the morning, and the back of this car is about 100 degrees already. So if you couple this with not harvesting that rainwater into the soil, it can be an added increased effect of drought on the landscape. So this is typically how we design most of our residential lots, right? We basically designed this dehydration infrastructure into most developments, basically draining all of the water off onto the street, picking up oil as it goes, rushing quickly to the river. And so why would we design this? Why wouldn't we want to actually keep the water where the plants are and design a more abundant system? So again, how do we want to design scarcity or design abundance, right? And I wanted to just come with some positive reinforcement today that we can design our way to abundance, right? And these five strategies that I'm bringing today can help us do that. right? So again, on the left, this is a path to scarcity. We drain all the water onto the streets. Then we import chlorinated water in our drip systems and barely keep our plants alive. Where we could just keep all of our rainwater on site, infiltrating into areas that are beneficial to the plants and greatly reduce our need for irrigation and have a more abundant system around our house. Right? So here's some basic water harvesting principles. They're basic common sense, basically. You know, obviously observing where your possibilities are, what your options are, starting at the top, working your way down. Like so many things in life, starting small and simple. And again, this is our key strategy here, is to slow, spread, and infiltrate the flow of water, right? So, and as dry as we've been, and you think it's never going to rain, you always want to plan for the overflow route and manage your overflow as a resource. Again, we don't, because we don't know what the future holds, we're going to possibly have more quick and strong storms. We need to make sure that we're not flooding any areas that we don't want water in, right? So again, maximize living in organic ground covers, so keeping the ground covered so that the water, those roots of the plants can help the water really absorb into the soil better. Again, thinking about how the different parts of your system can work together, right? We call it stacking functions in permaculture. And then again, like everything in life, is reassessing your system or accepting feedback, seeing what works and doesn't work, and then adjusting your system to be more optimal from that feedback. Right? So here's some just different examples of tanks in an urban setting. You know, they can be beautiful, or they can work into the landscape or the aesthetic of a house. That was a poly tank. This is a galvanized tank. Again, I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and it's known for being wet and lush. And now I live in Santa Fe, that has about half the annual rainfall of Portland. But if we can use some of these strategies, you know, if I can infiltrate 3,000 square feet of rainwater from impermeable surfaces around my home into 3,000 square feet of productive growing space, and basically providing this growing space in Santa Fe with the same quality of water that's in the equally sized area in Portland, right? So by designing these different systems and having them work together, I can really manipulate the landscape in a way to be more abundant and provide more food, right? So like in Santa Fe, an average size house of 2,000 square feet sheds over 19,000 gallons of water on average. And so basically that's enough water to keep 8 semi-dwarf fruit trees supplied with irrigation water. So even in arid areas, the water can really add up, right? So a lot of times people think, come to me and say, well, there's not much water, you know, because we only get, you know, 12 inches of water or 14 inches of water. But actually, even that amount can really add up to thousands and thousands of gallons. Okay, so this is one of our designs. We design large water harvesting systems down to small ones. This is a 10,000 gallon system here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so the red lines are the conveyance pipes. So those are the pipes that take the water from the roof to the tanks. So then these are different scupper collection points, these red boxes, right? And then they're all bringing the water down to the filter here and into the tanks. And so I just wanted to give you a little example of a drawing. And again, this system also has the added benefit. See these blue lines back here? That's actually an acequia, so that's like an irrigation an irrigation ditch, and so after the snow fills the tanks over the winter, we can actually open this irrigation ditch as the snow's melting in the mountains and actually fill the tanks with that irrigation water as well, to help get us through that dry springtime. So here's the installation of that system. These are polyethylene tanks. They're like number 2 plastic. And then these are the risers here to access where the pump and the filter is going to go. This is a design for a 20,000 gallon system. That last system was for solely for irrigation water, but this system, this 20,000 gallon system, is for both potable and irrigation. This client's well went dry. This is this lot is east of Albuquerque, New Mexico. So this just, you don't have to read all of this. This just is giving you an idea of figuring out what the tank size is, how many gallons per month and per year. This is showing basically the conveyance lines and where the system is laid out. So again, this is a 20,000 gallon tank, or 20,000 gallon system. In this system, we're actually linking 2,500 gallon tanks together to act as one tank, because that's often less expensive than doing a one large tank. So here's just some basic details of the system. So here's the filter up here coming in, and how the tanks are connected. And of course the tanks need vents, so as the water comes in, the air can go out. Little detail of the pumping system here. And here's a picture of that system being installed. So again, these, sometimes these systems aren't economical, depending on what your water source currently is. But in other situations, this is either the only way to have potable water besides trucking water in, or it also supplies extra security. So if you had a slow well or something like that, that this would be an excellent backup system. And for potable systems, these are all licensed by the state, and so they're brought back into the house and run through a filtration system and an ultraviolet sterilization system. So here's an example of more of an urban setting design, where we have small water catchment tanks next to the pergola here, and then some of the water is actually infiltrated passively into the landscape. This is an edible landscape permaculture design here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so with permaculture, we really stress relationships and how all of these different systems can really work together. So it's not just the water harvesting, it's not just the plants, but it's how all of these systems can work together to maximize abundance, basically. So again, here's our Greywater system coming out. These are our infiltrators, Greywater infiltrators. So reusing that water as well. And we looked at poly tanks and galvanized tanks. This is a ferrous cement tank that we were installing in Uganda. So you can make tanks out of several types of materials, and they can, depending on the climate and the situation. This is a job here in Santa Fe where we're harvesting off of this carport. And this is a gravity-fed system to this 3,000 gallon tank, which then gravity feeds down to a small food forest and a greenhouse area. So it provides water to this apple tree and several vegetables and different products down in the garden. This is, again, this edible food forest supplied by Rainwater here in Santa Fe. So When you take pictures of these types of systems, it just looks kind of like a green mass, but there's all types of different productive plants in here, from mulch and fodder plants to nitrogen fixing plants to food production plants. And this is all provided by rainwater harvesting. This is just more pictures of rainwater harvesting gardens. So these are both veggie gardens, and really thinking about multi-use plants also. So not just not just for beauty, but also for food production. So again, on the left, like nasturtiums and other edible flowers, they can be both beautiful and provide salad greens. So we also want to think, that was more what we call like active systems, and so now I'm moving more into passive design and passive water harvesting. This is a erosion control passive water harvesting swale being constructed with local mulch material in Jamaica, in a class I was doing in Jamaica last year. So this is collecting materials, and this would be kind of the finished bed. So basically, we would lay these out on contours so that they would slow down and harvest rainwater, and the water would soak into the sperm, and then you can actually plant perennial plants and vegetables into these berms. Another passive way to harvest water is wherever water collects into gullies, is you can slow it down with some type of check dam. You can use brush, you can use rocks, you could use rocks wrapped in wire, which are called gabions, but the whole idea is to slow the water down, soak it into the soil, recharge the aquifer, and then plant productive pollinators and edible plants around these structures. So here's an example of one of those check dams after they was put in. So this is harvesting several thousand gallons of water. This is actually on my property. You can see some in the background also. So you can do this down a series of these down a watershed and actually infiltrate tens of thousands of gallons, and over time really make a large impact on the aquifer. After these are in for a season, they'll silt up a little bit behind, providing a nice sponge, and then we'll go ahead and plant attracting plants and native food production plants, native plums, native currants, and plants that can provide habitat for wildlife. So another technique of passive systems is actually catching water from either downspouts or what we call canales, which are like scuppers, and then you can catch them into these catch boxes. Usually this box will have like a pond liner that comes up to a more of an edger or something like this, where you can, so all the water falling in this circle with the gravel would actually be dropping into this catch box and then draining to some kind of a permeable area. So whether it's like pumice or gravel or some area to infiltrate this into the ground, so that the neighboring plants can take advantage of that water. So here's an example of, to the left, like a water catchment area, like a catch box, and then it's actually draining out. So this part of the pipe would be solid, and then this part here with the pumice, or this is actually a scoria, this would actually be perforated pipe so that the water can drain into the soil and provide extra irrigation water and keep that water in the soil instead of running off to the streets. So many people have probably heard of swales, and this is another technique of water harvesting, basically berms and ditches on contour. So if you were looking at a topographical map, you would put the swales along the lines of the topographical map, that these berms would be level to themselves on contour. And And so we also do this passive grading, basically, providing for rain gardens or moving the water where the plants are. So here's an example of kind of a before and after with swales. This is working in Africa. So again, this can be a great tool in our toolkit to really keep the water where we want it and soak it into the ground. This is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, or outside Santa Fe, where this is a project where the people already had some orchards and vineyards, and basically the neighbors were draining all of their water onto their land, and so they were actually on average getting about 8 million gallons per year from the neighboring property, and it was collecting at the low point of their property and rushing quickly to the river. And so with this project, our focus was to slow that water down and spread it across their landscape to support more of their vegetation and reduce the use of their well. So these are actually swale berms that were put into the landscape through the different plants. This is a rockline spillway, so we always, again, want to plan for a beneficial use for our overflows, and so we want to have these overflows protected with the rocks so that it doesn't erode the berm. And then we also, of course, want to plant any disturbed soil with native grasses or wildflowers or some kind of a perennial ground cover to actually hold all of this in place and reduce erosion. Here's another example of berms put into an orchard on the left-hand side with a spillway, and then the berms to the right are around a small vineyard, and this is actually after they're already planted out or seeded with native grasses and wildflowers. And so this is the mulch on here is like a native hay mulch that we use with our seeding. So you can see that this catchment area in here really holds the water as it comes through and soaks it into the soil and really supports the growth of the vineyard. Here's another project where we did those swales and passive grading to harvest water. And so this is, so you can see a job after a few years of how well the plants are doing. So this is, there's some hackberries in here, some mulberries, some three-leaf sumac, some Nanking cherries, some choke cherries. You can kind of see how these systems evolve over time. Basically, you're setting up the landscape to be successful by itself, and so, or more or less by itself. Catching the stormwater, infiltrating it, having productive plants in the system, and just basically designing a perennial food forest system. So again, this is another edible landscape here in Santa Fe, and so we're actually using the pond as one of the water harvesting systems in this design. So there's a small water harvesting tank behind the house. As that tank overflows, it overflows into the pond, which has some edible plants and has some fish in it and attracts beneficials like butterflies and bees and dragonflies, and which are pollinators, and then it overflows into plants that like extra water, like edible bamboo and other plants that take more water. So you can use different types of strategies to harvest the water, from tanks to ponds to grading the landscape to where the water can be useful. Here's another edible landscape in Santa Fe here with ground covers of strawberries and fruit trees, apples, peaches, almonds. I think there's some pears and plums also. And so just another example of a rainwater harvesting supported garden. So again, we can use them in a residential situation or also in a more commercial setting. So this is becoming a popular technique throughout the country to try to keep this rainwater in drainage basins and soak it back into the soil instead of straight to the rivers or overflowing the water treatment plants. So this is a basic design of like, you know, of a drainage basin or a catchment basin or what we would call like a rain garden. And again, we always want to go back to, we want to slow spread and sink that water. So these bioretention basins, they're usually shallow mulched basins that collect runoff from impervious surfaces, and they're planted with appropriate vegetation to live off passive irrigation. So it's not just simple landscaping, but with careful planning, bioretention basins can address watershed concerns associated with urban growth. And a lot of the issues with, like in Portland where I grew up, it used to be where, you know, when there was a large rain, the sewage system would get overloaded and basically dump raw sewage into the Willamette River. And so these systems can really help mitigate that stormwater, move it into the landscape, soak it in into the appropriate areas to provide irrigation to productive trees, shade trees, which of course have multiple beneficial effects of you know, reducing the heat island effect, increasing the amount of shade, increasing the livability of our communities. Here's just another couple examples of some newly planted bioretention swales or basins. So this is like a mulberry tree and some different native grasses planted. Sorry about that. Let me just put.
Are you still there, Jeremiah? Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, sorry about that. I thought I had phone on mute, but I'm in my office, so it should go to voicemail.
Does anyone have questions that they'd like to ask at this point? If you do, you can type them in the question box.
Yeah, this would be a good time for questions.
Jeremiah, I was wondering whether do you have advice on when and under what situations water should be filtered when it's going to be used in a edible garden for the active rainwater harvesting?
Well, basically, rainwater we use for you know, for perennial systems, we can basically use it straight into the soil. And then if you're going to use it in a vegetable garden, we usually just would want to use it as drip system on the soil and not actually spray it. And so this, you know, if it's not, if there is any bacteria in the systems or anything, you know, as long as you keep the water clean as it comes through the system, you know, with a pre-filtration and you're good with your system, then it's probably has very little bacteria. But just to be safe, we usually only use that water in a drip situation and not spray it.
Okay.
And then if we're bringing it up to potable levels, then we would even filter it more than just a drip system filtration. You run it through a carbon filter and then also through an ultraviolet sterilization.
Okay, we have one other question from Bruce Gray, and he asks, are there any city, county, or state incentives for installing collection systems? I just asked him where he's located, because of course it'll vary depending on what state you're in. What do you have? He's in Santa Fe, so for New Mexico, are there any particular incentive programs that you know about?
Well, the city of Santa Fe had one. I think it expired last year, but it was basically a rebate program on systems or tanks that I think backed out of your property tax or something like that. I don't know if necessarily an incentive program in the county, but it is actually a requirement that if you build a structure over 2,500 square feet that you need to put in a water harvesting system.
Okay.
So that's not necessarily an incentive, I don't think. It's more of a requirement.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that's going to vary tremendously around the country, and different municipalities have different programs. We have another question about what about moisture in basements, and will catching water cause moisture to wick back into walls?
Right, so that's a good point, is you definitely don't want to infiltrate water. Usually with houses without a basement, we say it's about 8 feet. That would be more like 12 or 15 feet with houses with basements. And depending on how old the basement is or whether it was properly sealed when it was built or anything like that. So here in New Mexico, we don't have a whole lot of basements. But in areas that many areas of the country have a lot of basements, and so then you would want to be extra careful to only infiltrate that water, downslope more, or at least maybe 15 feet from any structure.
Right, and it looked like in your systems you often had a solid pipe that took the water away from the house before it was released.
Right, exactly. So the rule of thumb without a basement is you want to at least get about 8 feet from the foundation before you start infiltrating the water. And then with basements, it probably would depend, but I'd go more like 12 or 15 feet.
Okay. Thanks. Why don't you go ahead and go back to your presentation?
Okay, great. So again, we've talked about, grading the lot so it actually accepts the rainwater, actively catching the tanks. Those tanks can overflow into these passive harvesting structures. And then the third strategy of creating an abundant landscape is really working on your soils. So thinking about how can we increase the water harvesting capacity of our soils, right? So that's through increased soil, increased organic matter in the soil. So there's lots of different methods for increasing the water capacity of our soils. We can do it by diversifying our soil biology, by applying mulches to the surface of the soil, and also increasing the organic matter of the soil. So in addition to improving our soil's ability to hold more water, we can also increase the availability of essential nutrients, collectively creating an environment that promotes robust plant growth and allowing for higher production of quality produce. And so this is just an example here of making compost at my house. And so I think, paying attention to the soil, this is our foundation of our system, and how can we create a strong foundation to support a productive landscape. So obviously that's by building up the organic matter, diversifying the soil with maybe mycorrhizal inoculant, basically all the organisms, their main activity in the soil is to grow and reproduce, right? So if we can support that symbiotic processes of those organisms to give and take nutrients back and forth to each other, increasing that soil ecosystem, then we'll have a more resilient system. This is an example of us applying activated compost tea onto a site. So this is another way to increase diversity of your soil. The different types of beneficial microbes in the soil all can work in unison to make those nutrients more available for the plants, right? So that's our third strategy, is our living soils. And then I really wanted to stress also with the fourth strategy is water reuse, and how do we get the most out of our water after we've spent all this energy or time to collect it and degrade our sites to make the best use of it. Is like how can we reuse that water many times, right? So as probably most people know, the amount of water on the earth is a fixed quantity, and so that fresh water is only about 2 or 3% of the overall water in the system, and that most of that fresh water is locked up as glaciers and ice. I mean, less every day now with global warming, but that basically leaves a half of 1% basically that's available for human use of the fresh water. And so obviously that's a finite and limited resource, and so we need to be very careful about how we use that fresh water and make sure that we can possibly reuse this water as many times as possible, right? So according to the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, 37% of the United States potable water is used for irrigation, right? So almost half of the water that we clean up to potable standards is being used for irrigation. So we basically could replace a large percentage of that with our gray water or treated black water to support a productive landscape, right? So we call this gray water. Gray water is basically water that's from the kitchen, or from everything except the toilets and the kitchen sink. So your laundry, your showers, your bathtub, your sinks, all of that, and then basically we call the kitchen sink and the toilets black water. And so that needs a whole nother level of cleaning or filtration, usually a secondary or tertiary treatment. So gray water, we always want to try to, as with any of those systems, going back to our design strategies, is keep it small and simple if possible. This is about as simple as you can get, is these gravity-fed mulched basins. And so basically draining the water right to where the plants are. This drawing says 10-foot minimum, from I think I said 8 foot earlier, but maybe going 10 feet out from the house, and then just draining this water into the landscape. And so doing a calculation of how much water you're actually producing, and then dividing that by how many trees that water can support, or how many square feet that water can support. And so again, with gray water, you don't, because of the bacteria in the pipes and from the dirt that you wash off your body or from your clothes, you don't want to use this on vegetables. This strategy is solely for perennial systems and soaking soaking an area with perennial plants or perennials, shrubs, trees, things that you're actually getting any kind of a product from that's not touching the water at all. So here's some different really simple branch drain gravity systems. So like this is one of our jobs where we're planting fruit and nut trees, and then basically using the basins that the trees were planted in as our surge basins. So as the water, gray water comes out, it gets split to the different pipes and the different areas into these drainage basins that have holes in them that infiltrate into the soil next to the trees. And then these buckets would be covered by a stone or a piece of concrete or something where you could access and look at them, do an inspection later on. So here's some other, that's more of a branch drain system. This is courtesy of Brad Lancaster. This is an idea of like basically the laundry to landscape. So taking your laundry machine and you can either have it just go out and split like that last picture where it just splits from 100% to 50% to 25% to 12.5%, or you can actually have it each pipe going to different areas like this is showing. So if you had to use bleach to sterilize something, you could move the pipe to the sewer, or you can move the drain pipe to different regions of the garden or different areas of the garden. And then you can actually, there's other valves like 3-way valves and 4-way valves where you can have an actuator switch. You could actually have a valve under the floor and not have to touch or move the pipe, and have a switch on the wall where you can just pick where the water will go. And so this is an example of what we call like laundry to landscape, which is taking the gray water out to these mulched basins. Greywater systems can be very simple too. This is a little project in Mexico we were working on, and basically, the gray water was just spilling outside this lady's house and pooling up and becoming a nuisance and a health hazard. And so basically just using a little bit of cement to get that water out to plants that can really use it, like bananas and things that like a lot of nutrients and like a lot of water. So this comes back to another point with gray water is you don't want to store gray water. You want to actually just use it as you produce it. And so this gray water will become black water and get smelly within 24 or 48 hours because of the different nutrients and bacteria in it. So just get that water out to the landscape as you produce it, and you won't have any problems. In my house, I actually reuse all of the water out of the house. So I actually reused my black water and gray water. And so I had one little point too about gray water. Sorry about that. I wanted to, according to the United States, U.S. EPA, the average American family of 4 uses about 280 gallons of water per day for indoor use. Of that water, about 204 gallons is gray water, the rest being black water for like toilets or kitchen sink. And so that's so a family of 4 on average producing about 200 gallons a day. And then according to the University of California Backyard Orchard Guide, that would be enough water to support 12 semi-dwarf fruit or nut trees. So that, the gray water can really add up. And so when you're using these strategies together with the active harvesting plus the grading the water into the rain gardens plus using your gray water, you basically can dramatically change the microclimate around your site, and so which can lead to more food production, bringing in more wildlife and all of those beneficials that I'm sure you're aware of. So again, back to Blackwater. This is the system that I have at my house. This is actually a picture from another system, but I have the same model here. And it's basically, you can see that corrugated plastic is providing lots of surface area for beneficial bacteria. So you inoculate this tank with beneficial bacteria, and you actually change it to an aerobic system. So you can see that soaker hose kind of diffuser to the lower left here. Down here, this is actually, this hose has air going to be pumped down into this, which provides, oxygenates the water, and then the bacteria grows on this corrugated plastic, and the bacteria cleans the black water up to gray water standards so that you can use it in an irrigation system. And so this is what I actually use at my house, and between my rainwater harvesting and my gray water and black water reuse, I'm supporting about 10,000 square feet of productive food forest area. So this technology is a little more complicated than just a gravity-fed system, because this needs a pump to push the water through a drip system. But I think that electricity is well used in that it saves so much water and so much pumping of your wells or aquifer. So I think it's a good use of the electricity. So this is a system for a client showing that these are drip lines coming from the Blackwater system. So you know, this Blackwater is cleaned up to Greywater standards and then run through filters to supply this nutrient-rich water to a productive landscape. So this is an example of basically a simple landscape that can be beautiful but also provide a lot of products and nutrients. So this is at my house, and so this is what we call in permaculture like a guild. So it's basically designing useful plants around each other to support each other, right? So a symbiotic relationship of plants or assembly of plants to support each other and to provide higher yield. So we want to include in those systems, you know, if we have a fruit tree or a nut tree that needs to be pollinated, then we want to plant pollinator attracting plants around this main element. So you know, perennials that bloom throughout the season, and then we also want to produce or grow like this comfrey here that helps mine nutrients up from deep in the soil and bring them up to the top of the soil with its leaves, which we can use as mulch. So this is an example of what we call a guild, which is like an assembly of plants that are basically growing in symbiosis. Or the other famous guild that isn't a perennial system but an annual guild would be like the Three Sisters. So corn, beans, and squash all growing together, that you know, the corn needing lots of nutrients gets nitrogen from the beans use the corn as the trellis, and the squash is a great ground cover and weed suppressant, covering the soil and keeping shade on the soil. So this is our fifth strategy, is basically this multifunction perennial polyculture is what I call it. So thinking of plants that work well together, that are perennial, and that give you a high diversity of yields, right? So you know, a lot of times I see people's orchards, or what they call like you know, a food forest, and it's really more of like a fruit forest. And so I really want to encourage people to think about growing oil, you know, growing nuts, and thinking about how do they provide their protein and their oils and things like that. And so in many climates, there's great nut trees that can fill that niche. And I just wanted to you know, give everyone a lot of hope and you know, excitement about creating abundance around their houses, right? So that we can grow beautiful landscapes and move away from landscapes from only being just thought of as beauty being the sole source, but creating a more abundant and resilient future for ourselves will force us to move away from beauty being its sole product, basically. And so so if we can incorporate into our landscapes that concept of stacking functions, where it can do multiple things besides just be beautiful, can move us toward an abundant future. These are just different pictures here of different rainwater harvested supported landscapes. This is a hoop house where I can take the fabric off during the warm season, and then I can put a white fabric back on it in the cold season. So actually, you know, creating and working with those microclimates is another great strategy. Here's that inside the hoop house with the cover on. So this is a landscape that's supported by all of these different strategies that I've listed today, that I've talked about today, from passive harvesting to active harvesting to water reuse, and then supporting a diverse perennial system. And this is all in an area of, you know, on average about 14 inches of rain per year. We've actually been getting more like 10 or 12. When this picture was taken, I think this year, this was last year, we only got about 10 inches of rain, I think. So, so I just wanted to give everyone as much hope and optimism as possible that thinking of all of these systems together, supporting each other, that you can create a really resilient system, even in a coming era of uncertainty with how much rain we're going to get, or how hot, or what our weather is going to be doing. As long as we design a resilient system, we'll have a much more productive landscape in the future. So here's a couple other pictures, again thinking about your ground covers, productive plants. These are, you know, strawberries, raspberries, peaches, nectarines. There's some hazelnuts over here, back to the left outside the picture, chestnuts, walnuts, onions, medicinal plants. So thinking about all of the things that you would want to eat, or what types of like herbs you might buy, like what can I grow close by around my house that really supplies for my needs. Right, here's a couple other pictures. And this is really why we're doing this, right? Is because we want to produce more of the food locally. We want to be happy. We want to be healthy. And so I hope that these 5 different strategies that I've put forward today will help you move in that direction and inspire you to research more of these techniques and explore these options to create an abundant future for yourself. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much, Jeremiah. Those pictures really are inspiring and beautiful. We do have, so again, for the audience, if you want to type in any questions, we do have a question from Ann Heller about why is gray water acceptable for fruit trees but not for vegetables?
Well, because with fruit trees, basically the plant is filtering the water. So if you have that diversity in your soil, there's soil microbes that actually use the nutrients and materials in the gray water as food and help break that down. And then the tree actually filters that water as it uses it and as it transpires the water through its trunk and its leaves. And so they've done a lot of studies where the fruit won't have the bacteria or viruses or anything that are actually in the soil. The thing that you want to be careful about, though, is things that are on the periodic table. Those materials, like heavy metals, can't be broken down anymore. So bacteria and viruses can be broken down in the soil, but heavy metals are at their base state. So you want to be careful that testing your soil beforehand to make sure that there's not high levels of uranium or lead or cadmium or mercury or things like that, because plants can concentrate heavy metals, but they in general break down the viruses and the bacteria. Why you wouldn't want to use the gray water on the vegetables, I think, is maybe more obvious, where the vegetables could, the water could actually possibly touch the leaves and some vegetables you often don't cook before you eat. So that's just as a general rule, we don't use the gray water on vegetables.
I was really impressed with the pictures you had of the check dams, because I think stream restoration is a big issue across the country, and you know, they do similar things around the country for trying to restore streams, but in addition, thinking about it from a permaculture perspective was really interesting.
Yeah, we've done that on most of our 10 acres here. And after rain, you know, our drainages, or what we call arroyos, are kind of ephemeral drainages, will, you know, slowly be trickling water for 2 or 3 weeks after a storm, where all of the other drainages around us are dry after a day or two. So it can make a real difference in holding that water in the system as long as possible.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that there's sort of a legacy of land use in a lot of the country where trees have died out, or land has been clear cut or farmed, and that's led to a lot of degradation of the soil and the streams, and so we're sort of still trying to fix that.
Right, exactly. Yeah, just kind of trying to help turn that boat around if possible.
Yeah. And again, thank you very much, Jeremiah, for your time and in presentation. And I want to thank everyone for attending the webinar.